with this video, we're just going to kind of build off of the last one in the sense of sticking with the same path, right? It's just one way or one less thing to have to kind of do over again. And again, I kind of like this where it's uniform on one side, but then on this side, it's got a slightly wider area. And again, we can always kind of play with it to get certain kind of output. Again, I like this idea that we can think of this as some kind of node in the pathway to allow for people to gather, hang out in a more kind of shaded area. And this is where we're going to kind of focus where this new type of screen or shade structure is going to happen. This is going to be more of kind of a solid panel, but we're going to apply some perforations to it as well. So in order to do this, again, we're going to look at these points to create this back curve. We're just really going to focus on one of them in this case. I'll use, again, the interpolated curve. Let's see, yep, that is the correct one. So the start points creates that one. And again, we can start to determine how dense we want this kind of profile that we're going to make for it using the divide curve by points. So I'll again stick with something around 15 as our density level. So this is where we're going to start to basically just use 3 points to create our shade structure. You'll see that in this process, if you want to have more points, you can obviously kind of continue this process, but this is basically just allowing us to create a profile curve. If we have 2, it's basically just going to create a line segment. With 3, we can actually add more curvature to it. So this is really just going to be the first one, right? The base point. The next one is then determining how high do I want these points to move up. So again, I'll use sets to create a range of values for my graph mapper. Parameters, input, graph mapper. And I can start to determine how I want this to work. I'll try using the, let's do something a little more unique, so to speak. Let's try using the, I mean, it's not too unique, but let's use the sine. And I want it to have some variation between maybe, let's say, we can keep it 0 since I can always change it, but then maybe it has a max height of 3.5. So it even starts to kind of emulate a hand railing. All right, so I'm going to move these points. Or actually, sorry, I do want them to go drastically higher than 3.5. I want them to actually cover someone. So let's try 10 for now. And this again is moving in the z direction. Can turn off these ones for now. Right, so now I start to get an idea of where that's going to happen. Obviously, I want the height to happen where this kind of node part is, so I can shift this over until I get it closer to that as my high point, right? I can always kind of even have a little more flexibility of what this is looking like, right? So again, it has some nice variety to it. Then the next thing we want to do again, this would just create kind of a linear wall if I were to connect these points with that. But again, I want it to start to kind of cover and go on top of it. So again, I'm going to basically repeat a lot of these steps. Instead of moving it in the z though, I will use the parameters that determine that. And I am also going to use a graph mapper as well. So again, for the direction, we need to know, this is the points we're going to move, right? So I need to actually figure out how to move them inward. So this is where I can again use the curves, analysis, horizontal frame. This is the curve I'm analyzing. This is the t-value, so I know again the green direction is how I want to move it. So vector, deconstruct, and again, I'm using the green or the y-axis, so I'll use the vector amplitude, so I can assign how far I want it to move in that direction. So let's make sure I use the right one, so y. Can turn this off. So basically now I want to determine how far I want them to move in. And I'm going to use a different type. I'll use the Gaussian one again. So I'll plug this into there for now. Move that into there. So we can get we'll try to get pretty close to where that node is. So I'll just shift this over till I can see, right? So I can see that it's really starting to move over there. I can accentuate it more. Maybe it's slightly wider, but it's kind of cool. You can almost start to match it with the middle or even all the way to the end. All right, so there's some kind of fun ways to do this in order to get it to work correctly. Let's just kind of keep messing with it. That's kind of interesting, right? Kind of like that. So you can start to see that I'm basically just kind of shifting them in that direction, using the same height. And again, that's going to actually affect how that profile curve is going to be created from these points. If I want, I could obviously even move these almost in both the x and the y. Or sorry, the y and the z. Let's try something real quick. Let's use both. Let's create a vector using, again, the y and the z, using that amplitude. So again, it kind of shifts it. I wanted it to be a little more. That's not quite what I wanted, so let's just stick with the y. Because I wanted to kind of almost go in an angle instead of just directly over. I wanted it to also move up a little, but it doesn't apparently want to do it that way. So, oddly enough, I guess maybe if I used, let's just try both the x, y, and z. Oh, it's just going the opposite direction. So what if well, again, I'm just going to keep playing with this almost until I get what I want. So let's try reversing the x. Nope. All right. Well, I'm not going to mess with these anymore. I'm just going to stick with this. Okay. And again, if I wanted to, maybe these ones don't go as high, right? So maybe they're stick a little bit lower. But then I can then again move these in the same additional z direction. All right, so I can start to almost see, if I were to also turn on these points, right, where it's kind of starting to cave over it, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, you can have a lot of kind of variation with this by just messing with some of these points or additional ones, right? So I'll show you where if you want to just connect some versus the other. I kind of like this approach where I've taken them and moved them more. Again, using that same kind of parameter, just basically doing it twice. And so what I want to do now is look at all these 3 points. So I'm going to isolate them and graph them. So there's this one. Copy and paste it and do it for this one as well. I'm going to copy and paste it one more time. So I've got those 3 points grafted and isolated, because the reason I want to do that is that way these 3 will actually begin to connect this way instead of connecting in the other direction. I mean, at this point, you could probably actually get away with not grafting them. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it'd be the same result, but we're already here. I'll show you how that works. So let's go to curve. I mean, this dictates how that profile curve looks like, so I do kind of like this approach a little bit better. You'll see that we can create, basically, out of this spline category, we can create a polyline curve, interpolated curve, or even this NURBS curve. So let's just look at the polyline. This is going to give us a very kind of rigid kind of shade structure, right? The interpolated will give us more of a kind of blended or smoother shape. Okay, I can see how that looks like now. And then, lastly, right, so that's what that one looks like. Kind of interesting how it goes straight up and then has that kind of arching condition in other areas. And then lastly, there's the NURBS, which is basically going to probably treat this middle one kind of like as a reference. So if I look at this, at the points real quick for that one, you can see that the points aren't actually always intersecting or using that, right? It's kind of just being guided by it. If I change the degree, that'll to 2, it'll fix that error. It's basically saying you need to have, your degree needs to be less than the number of points. So I had 3 points, so therefore I needed 2, not 3. And you can see it doesn't really change the results. I'm not a huge fan of that. You need to have a lot more points in order to get something a little more defined. But I do like how this interpolated curve came out. So let's just continue to build off of that one. I'll show you what happens if we just still used these 3 points or set of points to create, again, maybe interpolated curves. Again, that one's pretty much the same. Do the same thing here. And then lastly, I'll do it one more time for this one. All right, so I've got those 3 curves. If I were to just try to loft these together, it kind of gets close to that interpolated one. So again, there's kind of more than one way to do it. Either gives us that result. So let's turn off these points. So I'm just left with the screen. Okay, and again, all this is kind of getting dictated. I kind of like that top view, right, where it's kind of gets really close there. That one's a little more shaded. If I want to adjust the different kind of initial heights, can always mess with that a little bit more. Can add more to it. Kind of like just sticking with this original. I don't know if I want to mess with it too much. Might not be able to get back to it. And again, it looks rigid, but that's just the display quality. If I change that to high, you see how that looks much more organic and nice and curved. So let's go back to the low quality so it's not killing our RAM. And so one last thing I want to do with this, again, it's maybe not about having this kind of uh, solid sheet, but maybe something a little more kind of screened out. So the idea is maybe there's more kind of uh, openings at the on the lower, and then as it gets higher, they start to either dissipate, so it actually starts to kind of cover it. Something that's kind of interesting too. I'm just curious to know with this, if I did a lofted surface with these. Let's make sure. Let's go ahead and flatten that. Oops, I don't know what that's going to do. So all right, that again, it's just going to have those 2 points, which again, it's not too interesting. If there's more, it could look a little more interesting, but anyways, just curious. So like I said, let's create some kind of screening parameters for this. So I'm going to take this surface and divide it by a bunch of points for now. So I can start to dictate, so in the U direction, that's this kind of direction, but I want obviously a lot more in the other direction, so let's reduce that a bit. Maybe to like 20. But then do the other one like 300. So I have a nice kind of dense grid of points. I can, I guess, get a little bit wider. Yep, that looks good. So what's cool with this, again, let's flatten these points for both that and my normal direction, because from these points, I can basically assign a circle to them using that direction so that they're actually tangent with it. So circle CNR, it's asking for the center point and the direction. Then it's going to give me an obscure radius, so I'm going to drop that quite a bit. Right, so now I've got all those curves nice and perpendicular. Obviously, in these areas, they start to overlap, so we could filter those out. But for now, I'm just going to kind of keep it like this because they're going to get changed anyways. It's going to be kind of the beauty of this parameter. So, like I said, I want them to kind of, in this case, maybe they start off hollow or solid towards the bottom, then they open up in the middle, then they get solid again. So in order to get that to work, I'm going to create a parameter for my radius based off of the height of my points. This kind of gives us a good range of like how big we can probably get some of these circles at. So some areas, maybe, yeah, I do want them significantly larger versus areas I want them to be either really small or non-existent. So vectors, I'm going to deconstruct these points to get their z value because that's going to be the parameter I use to dictate their height. And so I'm just going to go ahead and remap these values so that I can work with it better in the graph mapper. So use the minimum and maximum. And then again, I'm just going to stick with that. So input, graph mapper. So basically the middle range of height is where I want it to kind of get wider. So I'm going to use graph type because the best way to use that again is using the Gaussian one probably because I can dictate where that middle value is. So basically here's the bottom of my shade structure, here's the top, and here's my middle values. So I can keep them around 0 and do the highest around again like 3.5 for now, or sorry, 0.35. That's gonna be way too big. 3.5. I'm gonna go ahead and hit OK. So now this will replace my radii, right? So that's pretty interesting, right? Um, maybe I want there to, again, kind of have some perforations in those lower areas and these upper areas. Create something kind of interesting like that. So again, in terms of the shade structure, I want there to be as much kind of covering as possible. So I want to keep it closer to this kind of first 2/3, right? If I shift that over now, more of those uh, stay small. And then I can still see that there's some slight overlap. So maybe this needs to just be slightly smaller. And then maybe it's, again, kind of either that or I really kind of make this a little bit more narrow. How's that looking? That looks pretty cool. I'm actually really digging that kind of pattern, especially since I avoided there being any major kind of intersection. Oh, that's a bit of a pain over there, but oh wow. Because yeah, I guess that is slightly higher. Huh? So maybe we just have to do it with a slightly smaller value. It might be possible to get rid of that. So let's just make it slightly smaller. And again, I hate that it's gonna really affect it. Yeah, that's too bad. Let's so maybe it's even further over there. Let's try that. Dang, I'm really liked how it was before where I got it matching on the left hand side. Maybe I'll just live with it for now. So like I said, I really kind of like how that worked out. Oops, now I'm showing too much. Oops, not. Let's hide this stuff. Let's go back to this. There we go. So I think this is right where I want it to be. That's pretty close. Let's just shift that slightly. Okay. Like I said, I can live with this. So again, I kind of like how that has an interesting, fun gradient to it. It should work out over here okay. Yeah, it's a little much, but oh well. There's more ways in which we could do this actually with the kind of how we create this grid. Again, it just kind of tries to cram as whatever those values are in both directions. In reality, or in other ways, you could actually divide it to have just number of points. So, you know what? Because I'm content on getting this solved, I know what I can do. So earlier, again, I used this to kind of create my profile curves. What I'm going to do now is just create a lot more. Right, so this is going to be my kind of 300 value. And you'll see why. Okay? So think of that like that. So from these profile curves, I can actually do it like this. So I'm going to, instead of dividing them all by the same number, I'm going to divide them by a length. Okay? That's going to be something like 0.25. Right? So that way some are going to have, it's not going to cram them, right? It's just based off of that height. And that should help us solve some of those issues because it doesn't really matter where we're getting this pool of points. It just matters how we get it. Or sorry, not how we get it, but that we have it. So from this will be my new set of points. The only pain is that it's just one more step we have to do. So notice that we also need to still get that normal value. So we'll go to surface and use the surface closest point. So point, I can use this lofted surface. Gets me my UV, which I can use to get my normal. So surface, UV. Like I said, now I've got both the points and their normals. So basically that's going to replace this guy. So let's just go ahead and point into there, point, normal. Now we can start to see how that's working. And again, that's just a bit too intense. Again, yeah, especially with being, with their length being so close, let's make them a little bit wider. There we go. Now I can turn off of this, right? So now I'm getting more of that kind of result, which is pretty cool. Yeah, now I'm happy with it. So now I can obviously begin to bake this and split the surface using this perforation. It does require quite a bit of effort, so I'm not going to do it in here, but basically what you would do is that you would bake both the surface and these curves to create that actual screen. So that's what you can do from there. We'll look at other examples where maybe it's not just this kind of uh, uh, pattern of points, but actually using an image as well.